university back during COVID, but this is like shades of COVID doing this stuff now. It's kind of weird. All right, I'm going to view you guys in a gallery. And I'm going to view you. So is that different? Oh, I don't know how this works. I forgot how to do all this. It's been too long, guys. Okay, I don't want to view y'all in a gallery because then I can't see anything. Okay. So what if, I'm trying to remember how to do this, guys, so hang loose a sec. I'm going to go ahead and share. Okay, let's share screen one. Boom. Okay, now that's the way I want it. Okay, got it. I remembered correctly. All right, so right now y'all don't see squat. Is that correct? You see all my PDF files for my 280 Ackley Improved, my 264 WinMag, and all that other stuff, okay? But
we do.
All right, that sounds good. So here, let's go ahead and show this. And now you see, yeah, okay, good. You guys see my slide pack now, right?
Yep.
Cool.
Yes.
All right, we're slowly getting there. Give it a few more minutes, and then we will get started. So let's confirm that I'm recording. I'm pretty sure I am, but okay, where the hell did it say? There it is. More. So I am recording, so this will be recorded, and I can put this, I can put the link to the recording on Canvas when I'm done. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So we've got several things we have to get taken care of today. So let's kind of lay this all out and make sure that everybody understands kind of what the plan for this evening is. So this is a synchronous course. If you go look and you see block 4, Wednesday, 19 March from 6 to 8. This is a virtual, obviously, since we're not in class, but it's synchronous via Zoom, and I'm going to record it and I'm going to post it. So those of you who are here presumably are going to watch it real live time, and if you need to review it, you can see the link. Those people who aren't able to make it are going to watch the link. So that's the idea. What we have to do tonight is I want to go over cost structure. I want to go over the homework and answer any questions you guys might have about the homework that you tried to do. And then we've got one more thing I'd like to talk about with respect to cost structure that'll probably be related to the very last question on the homework that may have been a hard one for you, and we'll go over it and talk about that. And then we're going to start talking about inventory and lean operations. I'd like to point out that a week from today, same time, same channel, all that other good stuff, we have our second and final virtual course. And this one is going to be about uncertainty. And this is going to be about estimating uncertainty, dealing with uncertainty. Since you guys have had Eric's class, some of these ideas I think will be somewhat familiar with you. I'll show you my take on them, but it's nice that Eric has had a chance to kind of break you in on that stuff. So that's next Wednesday, is talking about uncertainty. And in particular, we're going to be estimating uncertainty. We're going to be talking about the central limit theorem. And we're going to be talking about something called the news vendor problem that allows us to collapse a range estimate into a point estimate. So if you struggled with stats or kind of some of the analytical components of stats and probability are challenging for you, you want to make sure to get ready for that course. Block 5 is the stuff I've asked you to look at in advance, and then block 6 is what we'll actually do next Wednesday. So that's the plan. Before I get going, any questions? And then I guess I should make some administrative notes here. My camera and my main monitor is there. So I'm pointing at that, and when I'm looking here, I'm looking at my main monitor, which has whatever display you're seeing. My secondary monitor is over here. This is where all your faces are. So if I'm looking over here, I'm not looking out the window wishing I were doing something else. I'm looking at your faces and trying to make this as close to a classroom as possible. I know it sucks. I know that Zoom classes are nowhere near as good as in-person classes, but to the extent that you can, will you turn on your camera so I can look at you and at least pretend like there are real life people behind the scenes right there? And I will try to be as close to a real-time class as I can. Now, obviously, if you're feeding your kids or your dog is, doing whatever, I understand. But if you can, I'd appreciate that. All right. So let's start by talking about the homework. So I'm going to pull it up. Um, that's not it. I'm going to pull it up. And we'll talk about this homework and we'll kind of work our way through it. Because remember, the first thing we always do is go over the homework that I asked you to. Now, in order to make this as useful as possible, what I've done is I obviously have the slide pack for block 4 where I have the homework that we're going to talk about. We can do this in some level of detail and go through it. Okay. I also have, just in case we want to use it, I also have the solutions that you've already had access to, so we can take a look at the solutions. But in addition, sometimes it's useful to, instead of me just talking, to actually work through some problems together. So I have a little cheesy doc cam, and the doc cam will allow me to kind of sit here and write on here and do shit so that we can kind of do stuff like I was doing it on the board. Okay, so we'll use all 3 of those mechanisms to try to make this make as much sense as possible. Now I'm pinning the doc cam so that makes it always the center when I'm not sharing. If that works for you, great. If there's a problem, let me know. But generally, that's what people like, is to pin either my face or the doc cam. So my face probably less important, the doc cam probably more important. So let's go ahead and we'll have a talk right now. So let me go back to me talking. Now I'm one of many faces in the gallery. All right, so let's start with the question. I've asked you to do the cost structure. The cost structure consists of coming up with the total cost and the variable cost and drawing the chart and figuring out the price and figuring out the contribution margin, break even, and operating leverage. My assumption is that for all of you, after you had a chance to try this and took a look at it, the first 3 questions are okay. Ultimately, you were able to generate this graph. Ultimately, you were able to figure out what the price needed to be. And ultimately, you were able to establish these kind of key metrics, the contribution margin, the break even, the operating leverage, and then in particular, since we'll use it later on, whatever gross profit margin we're making if we hit our target of 2,500 units per month. So I will talk through those, but I'm assuming those parts were okay. The more challenging part, and what I want to spend some time talking about, and really, I'll probably do the first 3 questions, give you an overview of the 4th question without going into detail on it, and then going and jumping back to the last 3 pages of our slide pack from last time. I want to go into kind of the theory behind it so we can come back and solve this problem in a fair amount of detail, and then in particular this last one. If you struggle with the last problem and you're not entirely sure what's happening, don't sweat that. It doesn't matter. I want to talk to you about it, but that's a hard problem. Of all these, that's intentionally a hard problem. So that's the game plan. I'm going to pause and see if there's any comments. I'm looking over at you guys over there. Any comments, questions, anything you want to say before we start diving into this? And I am drinking my wine as we do this, okay? I'm technically off the clock. I don't know. This is like extra work here, okay?
Hey, Professor, real quick, if we get started, how much time do you think we should allocate to study up on Block 5 prior to next week?
For block 5, you're going to have to watch some videos, and that's probably 2 hours of videos. And you're going to read through the slide pack as you're walking through the videos. So my guess is give yourself 3 hours, and that's probably okay.
Okay.
Let me reiterate. That's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. Let me reiterate. I'm going to go over the materials that we're covering in the videos. So watching the videos and having looked at the slide pack in advance simply makes you better able to follow what I'm going to talk about next week. But I'm not going to skip over it and not talk about it next week. I will talk about what's in the videos. It just helps if you've seen it. Okay, so that's the purpose. Yeah? Okay, other thing is, remember, later this month we have Dallas, and when my wife came back from Oregon last week, she brought back a bunch of wine. So we have a number of different of our most recent vintages you can try. So you'll get a chance to try all that. That's in Dallas. I think it's scheduled for Friday night. I'm not sure, but anyway, we'll figure all that when we're there. So we'll all be in residence at the same place. I'm guessing, do we still stay at the Marriott, that Marriott that you walked to the Centrum from? Have y'all been there before?
We're actually at the Virgin Hotel downtown.
Oh, really? We're not at the Marriott. Okay, well, I'm staying wherever you are, so I guess it's a new hotel. So, all right. All right.
Just real quick, you kind of scanned down on the solutions. What are you tracking to be the last question for the homework?
The last question for the homework is this cannibalization question. Did I not ask that? Maybe I was really nice to you and didn't even ask that question on the homework.
Yeah.
What not
The
there?
last question is, what is the lowest price for this homework?
The marine scopes is what you asked us.
Oh man, that was way too damn nice to you. Okay, so we're gonna go over. Okay, well then fine. We're gonna go over this one anyway. But now you won't have had to try that before we've had a chance to go over it. So okay, cool. All right. So let's do this. All right. Let's start by taking a look at here. Let's start with just recognizing this is the process. I'm going to give you a drawing of a process. When you do this, well, the first thing you're going to do when you take a look at this process is you're going to be going through and doing that IRT bit that we did for homework number 1. And you're going to be establishing what the bottleneck is, the lowest rate, and you're going to be establishing what the theoretical flow time is. And you'll be able to establish the maximum volume that's possible in some amount of time, whatever that is, a month, a week, a day, whatever it is I ask you for, based upon the bottleneck rate. So you will have already done all of that work for this problem before we get to the cost structure problem. Then we'll get to the cost structure problem. And the first question on the cost structure problem is always going to be the same. It's going to be, I give you some information about costs. Now let's be careful. There's different ways to give you information about costs. I can give you labor rates. In fact, I probably will give you labor rates, right? And in those labor rates, you'll be trying to figure out how much you'd have to pay to your employees over this period of time based on the number of employees and the rate at which you're paying them and the hours at which they're working. I can also give you capital costs. I can say this particular room, remember we think of cubicles and rooms or whatever, probably I'll give it to you in the form of what each cubicle in a room cost you. So if you decide to add more cubicles in a room, you're adding more of those costs. And so that's what this is, the monthly capital per workstation. In all most recent exams, I now call them cubicles, just so I'm using the same words that I talk about in class. But this 10,000, 5,000, 5,000, 10,000, that's the monthly capital costs associated with one of the cubicles in a room. If there's more than one cubicle in a room, then you have to have more than one of those costs. I do not care if you mess that up on this homework. I don't care. The whole purpose of the homework is for us to be able to have this conversation, because I know it felt a little overwhelming at the end of class last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever we had it, okay? So the first thing is I'll give you some labor information. The second thing I'll give you is possibly some capital information per cubicle, okay? And then I may also give you debt service information or other kinds of information that we have to pay. Our objective when we're looking for fixed cost is to understand, what does it cost me to have my doors open for that period of time? Regardless of whether I see any customers or not, what does it cost me just to have my doors open? And so if you think about it, I'm paying labor. And if I have a crappy month and I don't get many customers, Unless I tell you otherwise, labor is a fixed cost. So I'm going to have to be paying, looks like the labor rate is $65 an hour for whoever the operator of a CNC lathe is. So we come over here, there's only one CNC lathe and only one operator. So we have to pay one person $65 an hour for every hour that particular cubicle is running. That cubicle also costs you $10,000 in capital per month. There's only one of them, so it's $10,000, right? As opposed to, let's look at anodizing. All right, when we look at anodizing, it looks like I have to pay $40 per hour for every employee in anodizing. However, there's only one. This one employee is running back and forth, keeping all these things going. So I owe one person $40 an hour to keep that room running. I also have to pay $5,000 a month in capital fixed costs for each of the anodizing cubicles. There are 4 of them, so it's 4 times $5,000, and so forth. Okay, so I've given you that information, and you can simply do, the multiplication of how many employees times their rate. You can add to it however many workstations or cubicles there are and what that is, and that would come up with most of the fixed cost for this problem. Because when you read it, you say labor rates are stated per employee, fixed costs are estimated from the depreciation of the equipment. There's also debt servicing plus maintenance is followed. So we have to take into account the labor, and we have to take into account the capital, and then we have debt service we have to cover. If we can't cover our debt service during a month, we're in trouble. In this case, it looks like it's $600,000 per month. Parenthetically, I told you where it came from. That $600,000 a month is what we owe for our debt obligation of $25 million at a rate of 10% paid out over 5 years. But this is unimportant because I've already given you the number. The amount is $600,000 per month. Additionally, we have all of this equipment. In addition to whatever our capital cost for the equipment, we probably have maintenance contracts. And I said that's another $150,000. So we're going to simply put all of that stuff together to come up with what it cost us on a monthly basis to keep, here, let's find it. What it costs us on a monthly basis to keep our doors open. So let's go ahead and do it. Let me pull this over. Okay, y'all are hiding it. Okay. So, I know I gave you a long-winded explanation, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to come up with the ability to start drawing this chart. So let's draw an empty one, all right? And I won't do all the calculations because obviously you already know the calculations, but what do I suggest doing when I ask you for a cost structure? I ask you, the first thing to do is figure out what the time period is that we're interested in. It's a month. So I'm going to sit here and go, a month. Okay, so now I've established that it's a month. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw an empty graph, and the empty graph always has the same labels. This axis is volume, and we use the symbol X for volume. This axis cash units. Since we're in the US, we'll use the dollars sign for dollars, okay? So after we've understand it's for a month and we draw our empty cost structure, the next thing we have to know is we have to say, okay, this graph has an endpoint. We can't do more than a certain volume in any given month, given the set of resources that we have available to us. What is the maximum volume that is possible in that period of time with that set of resources? And that we're going to call X max. And if you look at the solution, I just came up with the X max directly because we already calculated that. If you remember back in when we were doing the process analysis, I said, how many is the most you can make in a standard month? Well, 18 scopes an hour, 8 hours a day, 20 days a month, we can make 2,880. So that's where that 2,880 comes from. Okay, so once we have that, that now becomes an upper bound on the volume we have to consider, and that's X max, and that's 2,880. So I'm assuming everybody's cool with that. And now we have the basic outline of a graph. Now, the first thing we want to be able to graph is we want to be able to graph what are the total cost as a function of the volume X. Now, the volume X can range from 0 all the way up to 2,880. So I want to know this as a function. And I know that, well, it's basically I always owe the fixed cost plus I owe the per unit variable cost times whatever volume I'm looking at. So the first thing we have to do is we have to figure out what the fixed costs are. Now, I'm not going to do that again. You can do that from this analysis here. Remember, I said in the fixed cost, we have our capital cost and we have our labor costs. And our capital cost, where there's one of those machines at 10,000, plus 4 at 5,000, plus 2 at 5,000, plus 3 at 10,000, and so forth. So the first sum of all those things is the monthly capital cost as established by depreciation. Now that's important because we've already talked about the fact that depreciation, although commonly used, is probably a poor way to do this. That gets us the bulk of our capital fixed costs. But don't forget, we also have to pay our debt service of $600,000 each month. And we also have to pay our maintenance contract of $150,000 a month. So our capital costs are all of these. And they turn out to be $865,000 a month. You can see the bulk of that is the debt service, right? So the debt service is a big chunk of what our fixed costs are here. The rest of it is just estimations of depreciation and a bit around maintenance contracts. Now we need to know our labor costs because our fixed costs are going to be our capital and our labor. We got our capital, so now we need to do our labor. There's one employee at $65 an hour, one employee at $40 an hour, two at $50 an hour, and so forth, all within the square brackets. And they're working 8 hours a day, 20 days a month, which is what got us to the volume of 2,880. So that turns out to be $135,000. So if you look at this, the fixed costs are really dominated by our debt service, which is not unusual probably in a business like this. But if I sum the 865 and the 135 together, I found out my fixed costs are $1 million. So my fixed costs are $1 million. It cost me $1 million to keep my doors open in a month. I've got to pay that no matter what volume I do. Now I need to know my variable cost. And the variable cost is, well, how much extra does it cost me? What's my COGS, cost of goods sold, for each, in this case, scope that I make? So in addition to all these fixed costs, I have to pay for the variable costs. When we look at the problem, all right, I gave you information. I said, okay, there are these, whatever the hell these lenses are. These are all real. It's roughly correct if you're interested. But basically, I purchased from a supplier the ocular lens, the objective lens, and the erector lenses. And I had to pay that supplier $550 for each of these lens sets for my supplier. For each scope, I had to pay $550 to get those particular lenses that I'm going to put into my product. I also had to buy some aluminum for all this stuff, and that was about $75 a scope. And then I have the accessories and packaging and other stuff, which is about $150 a scope. If you sum up 550, 75, and 150, that's where you come up with the variable cost. And the variable cost here are the 550 plus the 75 plus the 150. I have an additional $775 for every scope that I'm going to make. But now I got my equation. I know the total cost for any volume X is equal to, I always owe the $1 million, plus for every scope I actually make, I owe another $775. And that's all that one line is. It starts at $1 million, and it goes up at some slope. And the slope of this line is the $775 of variable cost. And this point over here, if we ended up doing 2,880, that's a big if. But if we ended up doing 2,880, then during that month, our total cost would have been 3,232,000. So what that basically means is in any given month, I'm going to owe somewhere between $1 million and $3.232 million based on the volume that I do in that month. Now, I don't know exactly how many I do. In any given month, it's going to vary, but that's the range of possible costs that I have. That's all we did in this first piece in order to establish this line. Now we've got to establish this line, which is the revenue line. How do we know what the revenue is? We got to figure out what price we're going to charge. And so then the question becomes, well, what price are we going to charge? I could just give it to you. I could just say, we are going to charge some amount for scope. But usually that's not the way it works. Usually you have some financial target. You go, well, my investors are expecting a particular kind of return, or I'm expecting a particular return, or I want to make a certain profit out of each scope I make. So there's going to be a financial goal or target. And we simply need to find the price that allows us to meet that financial goal or target. Now, another choice we have is, it looks like in any given month, I can do somewhere between no scopes all the way up to 2,880. Why would I ever price at something less than 2,880? Well, what if I'm not selling 2,880 scopes in a month? What if once I'm running my business and I'm selling my scopes and my distribution channels are working and this is how much I'm selling through my channels? What if I'm selling 2,500 scopes a month? It would be kind of pointless to use 2,880 scopes as the basis for a financial target, which I'm not going to meet on average, because that's not the volume that I'm doing. So we usually pick a volume representative of what we think is realistic. So in this particular case, we believe that what's realistic is an operating point of about 2,500 scopes a month. So we are not thinking we're going to run at full speed all the time. We are thinking we're not going to. And then we have a goal. I would like to establish the price to make $825 per unit gross profit margin when producing 2,000 scopes per month. Now, there's two ways to do it. I showed you one way to do it. I don't know which works for you best. But one way to do it is to think, okay, I sold 2,500 scopes. If I take a bar chart of the price I got for each scope, and I chopped it up into, well, I made $825 profit, and I had to set aside enough from each of those 2,500 scopes to cover my fixed costs, and I had some variable costs. You can think of it like a bar chart right here. So there are 2,500 scopes, and for each of those 2,500 scopes, I made $825 in profit. I had to set aside $400 for each scope, because if I did, spread out across 250 scopes, I would have covered my $1 million. So that covers my fixed cost. And then I have my variable cost. So you can do it like this to figure out that the price would need to be $2,000. Fine with me if you do it that way. That's probably the way I think about it, but you do what you do. The other way to do it, just to be clear, is here. You don't have to draw these pictures. You can always go back to first principles. First principle says the EBIT for any volume X is equal to minus F plus P minus V times a volume. That's a true statement. It always has to be a true statement. So let's just fill in what we know. What's the EBIT that we want to make at what volume? Well, we want to make $825 of EBIT if we sell 2,500 scopes. So now we know the EBIT side of this equation. Do I know my fixed costs? Yes, I calculated them up here. My fixed costs are $1 million, so I start off $1 million in the hole, and then I don't know the price because that's what I'm trying to solve for, but I do know the variable cost. It's $775 for each scope, and I know that I want this to be true at 2,500 scopes. So you can do it like that if you prefer. It's just solving an algebraic equation rather than drawing it as a bar chart. They are exactly the same. So if you were to isolate the P on this, you would find out this P, if you divide both sides by 2,500, this 2,500 goes away, this 2,500 goes away, and that goes into the million divided by 2,500. And this P becomes that 825 times the 2,500 got divided by the 2,500, so it's just the 825. And then this million moved to the other side, so it becomes plus $1 million. But we had to divide by the 2,500. And then finally, the 775 was multiplied by the 2,500, but I got rid of the 2,500. I divided by the 2,500 plus the 775. That 825 is that 825. That 1 million over 2,500 is that allocated fixed cost. And that 775 is that 775. So I don't care which way you do it. They're exactly the same thing. Do you like pictures and thinking them through like that? Do you like algebra and thinking them through like that? But the bottom line is we know that the price needs to be $2,000 per scope if we're going to hit our particular target. And now we can draw our curve, because now we know that I'm going to draw my revenue curve. My revenue curve for any volume X is going to be equal to my price times my volume X, which is $2,000 times X. Okay, so that's what we know. So if I don't sell in any given month, I didn't make any money. If I luck out and max out at 2880 for any given month, okay, doesn't mean I think I'm going to do that every month. It just means I got that this time. It looks like maybe that becomes $5,760,000, right? I can draw the line that connects those 2 points. I know the price is $2,000. I can find my break even, which we'll do, right? And if I wanted to, I probably do, I could actually figure out what my actual EBIT would be if I sold 2,500. I know what my EBIT is if I sell the max every month. It's 5,760 minus 3,232. So I could do that. Or I could calculate it at my operating point or whatever I want, whatever point you want to know this. And that leads us to the idea of, let's see, I don't have another color. I thought I had a blue, but I apparently don't. So we're going to just use black again. Here, maybe this is blue. Okay, so remember our EBIT, yeah it is, EBIT in any volume X, like we used down here, is minus F, right? Plus, well, now we know our P is $2,000. We know our V is 775, so that's $1,275 of contribution margin times X. So this would be my EBIT equation, and I can plot that. Or I can use logic up here, and I can say, if my revenue is 0 and my costs are $1 million, I started out losing $1 million. I know my break even is the point at which my revenue and my cost cross each other, so we got to figure out what that point is. And I know the most I could make would be the 5,760 minus the 3,232. Okay, and this is that contribution margin, which is the $1,275 for each. And this point over here, I guess I didn't calculate it, so let's do it real quick. So it's 5,760,000 minus 3,232,000. So it looks like in a great month where we maxed everything out, okay, I obviously didn't do that right, so hang loose. It's 5,760,000 minus 3,232,000 equals 2,528,000. Okay, so there you go. Now you've constructed the cost structure. That's a very useful tool. That's not just some kind of arbitrary academic exercise. That tells you what your months look like. And any given month, you tell me your volume and I'll tell you how much money you made. And if you in any given month hit exactly what you thought, 2,500, I can tell you what that is. I can find out this point right here. That EBIT right there is the same as that difference right there. It's equal to minus 1 million plus 1,275 times 2,500. But remember, we got it by setting our price such that we made $825 a piece if we sold 2,500. So I know what this EBIT is right here. It's $825 a piece times 2,500. So I made, if I sell exactly 2,500, I made $2,062,500. Right? Now, I have the chance of making another $500,000 if I sell more, but at the typical operating point, I made 2,062. So remember that. My EBIT at 2,500 is 2,062,500. And, you know, we might as well ask ourselves the question, what gross profit margin are we striving for? If that's what I said, we set everything up. What gross profit margin are we striving for? Well, remember, gross profit margin is EBIT at that volume as a percentage of the revenue at that volume. The EBIT at that volume we just determined was 2,062,500. The revenue, if we have that volume, is we sold $2,000 a piece times 2,500 scopes. So if we multiply that out, we find out our gross profit margin is 2,062,500 divided by 2,000 times 2,500. 41.25%. So we have a pretty good picture of the business at this point. We can then go through and answer the question, what's my contribution margin is price minus variable cost. That's that $1,225 a scope we get to play with. My break even. So how many do I have to sell before I finally break even? This is pretty interesting right here, because if you look at it, the break even is just, well, I got $1 million of fixed costs, and every time that I make a sale, I get a contribution margin of 1,225. So how many of those 1,225s do I need to pay off the 1 million? That's only 816 scopes. That's an awfully good business, because if you think of it, we only have to sell what? Less than a third of our maximum monthly volume before we start breaking even and getting months. So that's pretty good. I like this business, assuming that I'm comfortable with the volumes here. My operating leverage, remember, my operating leverage is simply what is my contribution margin as a percentage of price. Well, I'm getting a contribution margin of $1,225, sorry, out of a price of $2,000. So it's a pretty good contribution margin, 0.6125. And my gross profit margin I just calculated, if I sold 2,500, was 41.25%. So let's be clear on this. Are we clear? Why are we only making 41.25% actual gross profit margin when our operating leverage is 61.25? Why aren't we making 61.25%? Somebody tell me that.
We're not working at our maximum.
Even if we worked at our maximum, will we get all the way up to 61.25, 61.25%?
It's your fixed cost.
Yeah, remember, you don't make any money till you reach break even. So you made no gross profit margin up to your break even of 816. Then for everyone after that, you're making 61.25%. But you can never get away with the fact that the first 816, you didn't make any money on, okay? So you have to keep that. Diego, you look like you're going to heaven or something. You're in a, do y'all see that? He's like in a, you know, like the aura of the spirit or whatever. Okay. Anyways, everybody clear that yes, it's true, the marginal value is 61.25% for a sale, but I didn't make anything up until I got to 816. So it's just a weighted average. We good? Are there any questions? I expect every single one of you to get this part of the question, this part of the question, and this part of the question 100% right. You have to, okay? You have to. So then, what's the more interesting question? How are we going to take this idea and go a little bit further with it to make more interesting observations? So I'm going to draw a picture. I don't know whether you guys like this picture or not. I always kind of like it. I'm about to use this as an example, okay? So if you were to look at the equation for EBIT, the equation for EBIT says the EBIT for any volume X is equal to minus F plus P minus V times X, okay? And that's true as far as it goes. That's a true statement if you like algebra and math. But maybe a better way to think about this is to put it in terms of a picture and imagine piles of gold. Okay? So I want you to rearrange this picture in your mind. And I want you to say, okay, I just made a sale and I got a price PI for this. So I got some price PI, whatever that is. Now, I owed a contribution margin, CMI, and I'm sorry, that's not correct. I got a price PI and I owed a variable cost VI. So we're going to call this right here the contribution margin for the ith sale. So just an arbitrarily ith sale. When I have an arbitrary sale, I got a price for that sale. Maybe I always get the same price, in which case all the prices are the same. Maybe it's all the same products, so the variable costs are always the same. So all the V's are the same, but maybe not. Maybe some of my products, I get a higher price, but I have more cost involved in the variable cost. And other of my products, I have a lower price, but there's lower cost involved. So this generalization right here just says, imagine an arbitrary sale I get a contribution margin from that arbitrary sale I, and that is going to be the difference between the price I got for that sale minus the variable cost that I got for that sale. And what's going to happen is whatever that contribution margin is some gold. And I get to put some gold down here. Now I make another sale. And maybe it was the same price and maybe it was the same variable cost. Maybe it's a different price or a different variable cost. And when I made that new sale, I got to put some more gold down here. And what I want you to think about is this. All right? I want you to imagine that you have purchased the ability to do a certain volume of something. That's what your fixed costs are, okay? So you paid some fixed cost, and here's your fixed cost right here. And you paid some fixed cost. And you owe those fixed costs. And those fixed costs, it's a pile of gold that you owe, they bought you the ability to start making something or selling a service or whatever. And once you've spent that fixed cost in terms of dollars right here, you now go out and sell it. And you get a price, you subtract away the variable cost, you got a contribution margin, you throw it on this pile. You keep on doing that. Your fixed cost bought you the capability. In our example over here, the fixed cost bought you the capability of doing up to 2,880. So you paid $1 million of fixed cost to buy the opportunity to produce up to 2,880. And that's what the fixed costs are here. And then you sell that capability one sale at a time. And each sale you get a PI minus its VI, you throw the money on the pile. And you keep on doing that. All right, I'm going to go and I'm going to sell as many of these sales as I can. And I'm going to make this pile as big as I possibly can, okay? If I make this pile as big as I possibly can, from which I have to pay for this pile right here, my EBIT is going to be whatever's left over. My EBIT is just the pile sitting on top of the fixed cost over there. So there's a picture. that equation can be rearranged to look like this, which can be thought of as you spend a pile of gold called your fixed cost. Those fixed costs buy you the ability or the opportunity to do up to a certain volume of something. You now go sell that volume, trying to make your contribution margin pile as big as possible. And however big this pile is, after you subtract away this pile, you're left with your EBIT pile. And all that's happening in the example you see up here, okay, it's a little bit boring because they're all the same. In this particular case, a contribution margin is always the same. It's always equal to the price of $2,000 minus the variable cost of $775, which is equal to the $1,225. So every time you make a sale, you throw $1,225 on here. Your fixed cost were those $1 million that you have to pay. And your EBIT is whatever the difference is between your contribution margin pile minus your fixed cost equals your EBIT right there. So in our particular case, if we ran at 2,500 units, if we did that, the total contribution margin pile would be 2,500. Let's just do it. 2,500 times 1225 would be this pile right here would be $3,062,500. That's what that pile would be right there, of which you owe the 1 million, which means your EBIT is $2,062,500. That's all that's going on, okay? But we can generalize this idea. It doesn't have to be a fixed price all the time. Because if you start thinking of it like this, I get whatever price I get when I make a sale. The variable cost is whatever the variable cost is when I make a sale. A new sale gives me the difference, the price I got minus the variable cost, and I add on to this pile. If I add on to this pile and don't change this pile, I just added on to that pile. And that's all that's going on with this idea. It's very powerful once you think like this, okay? So now what is the next question? What was I trying to get at in this next question? Because I'm trying to push you a little bit on this, okay? What I want you to understand is something called incremental analysis. And I need a new color. I'm going to go find a blue pen real quick. So take a 5-minute break, and I'm going to find a blue pen so I can have a new color. All right, take a quick break. Okay, guys, I'm back. Um, so I think what I'm about to talk about is one of the single most useful things I talk about in class. So consider the fact that we have a factory, and in this factory we have paid enough money. We paid $1 million of fixed cost, and that $1 million of fixed cost bought us the capability to do up to 2,880 scopes. So we go out to the market and we try to sell these scopes. What do we do when we're doing that? Well, we try to sell the scopes for the highest contribution margin we could possibly sell them for. So you go out and you go, what's the highest price I can charge for the capability that the $1 million bought me? So you sell the crap out of that because that's the highest contribution margin. So each of those sales makes this pile as big as it can possibly be. One of two things is going to happen at that point. Either you're going to sell the entire capability that the $1 million bought you. That's a great outcome, right? Now you sold the entire volume that the $1 million bought you at the highest possible contribution margin, which means that that pile was as big as it could possibly be, from which you subtract this pile and you're left with this pile. All right? Great. I hope that happens to you. But if it doesn't happen to you, the next thing that will happen is you will run out of customers at that contribution margin. So you have unused capability. You can't sell any more of the capability at the highest contribution margin. So what do? You look for the next contribution margin. So what's the next highest contribution margin? And you sell the crap out of that. And then you keep on doing this until finally you can't find a positive contribution margin, in which case you're never going to sell for a negative contribution margin. So you can't find a positive contribution margin and you stop, or you run out of capability. That's the basic premise of what's happening here. And here's what I want you to understand. Every time you're thinking about incremental sales, it doesn't matter what your existing situation is. In this picture right here, in this picture, we are at 2,500 sales. So at 2,500 sales, the size of this pile is 3.062. The size of this pile is 1 million, which means the size of this pile is this. And that's true at x equals 2,500. But remember, x max equals 2,880. All right? So we have 380 unused capability that we're not able to sell at this contribution margin. So the question is, what else can we do with it? Who else can we sell it to? What can we do with it? How can we make use of the capability that the $1 million bought us? How do we do that? What do we do? Well, here's the beauty. It doesn't matter how you got to the black curve. That's past. That's whatever got you to where you are right now. That's equivalent to sunk cost. If you're considering incremental analysis, I'm going to do that in blue. That's why I wanted a different color. So I'm at 2,500, which means I have another 380 possible. Okay? What can I do with that 380? Well, I'm going to go out and I'm going to find a new price. Let's call this P star, that I can maybe sell that 380 at. And the P star may have a different variable cost. Maybe there's some other cost that I incur, or they're cheaper or whatever. So that is a new contribution margin star, which is the new price minus the new variable cost. And I'm going to get to throw that onto this pile. So there's going to be some extra coins that I throw on this pile. Those are blue coins right there. I do not have to consider the black. I only have to consider the incremental coins, because I ask myself this question. I say, in order to sell these new scopes right here, did I have to add any extra fixed cost here? Maybe I had to add a little bit of fixed cost here. Okay, those are blue coins on the fixed cost pile. If I don't care about what the black is, because that's already a done deal, I'm only interested in the incremental gain that's happened. Do you agree the incremental gain of the blue is whatever the size of the new blue contribution margin is, minus whatever the size of the new blue fixed cost is, becomes the incremental EBIT of the blue. And all I have to worry about is the new blue stuff. I don't have to worry about the old black stuff. That's the point. In fact, that's the way you should always think about capability, fixed cost, variable cost, volumes. You should always think about it. Now, I know in class 2 weeks ago, a question was raised, aren't there some negatives? Yeah, we're about to look at some potential negatives to this. But let's first of all figure out how much money we can make, and then let's look at the potential negatives to this, okay? All right, so in this problem here, I talked to you about selling scopes to the Marine Raiders. So if y'all don't know, Marine Corps always never was part of the Special Operations Command before. That was always Army, Navy, Air Force. Marine had its own special operations inside the Marine Corps called Force Recon. Then the Marines wanted to be part of the larger special operations, so they stood down Force Recon and they stood up something called the Marine Raiders. Be interesting to those of y'all in the EMBA program. You should know that the XO, a full bird colonel in the Marine Corps who stood up the Marine Corps Raiders, is a former EMBA student. Okay, so maybe 6 years ago, he's now a VP and SVP at Lower Colorado River Authority here. But anyway, so he stood up the Marine Raiders. The Marine Raiders are part of the Special Operations Group, just like Army Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Air Force parajumpers. And so imagine these guys, the Marine Raiders, wanted to buy a specialized scope from us. Now, mostly they wanted to use the same stuff that our scope already was. And it doesn't matter. All these words don't really matter. Okay, I only put them in there to put realistic context around it. Those of you who are former military already know this, but the scope that the Marine Corps uses and the other military has a special reticle in it. So when you look through it and you're looking at all the little etchings and everything, it's a special reticle. It's called the Horus Trimmer 3, okay? And it's just a special thing. It doesn't really matter. The bottom line, though, is that every time I use a Horus Trimmer 3, I have to pay a license fee of $150 per scope. So what that tells you is there is a new variable cost for this Marine Corps scope, okay? It's not the old 775. Remember, the old was the 775. That was for the lenses, for the aluminum, for the packaging and everything. But we have to pay an additional $150 for the Horus 3 reticle. All right, so that's the first thing to realize, okay, is that we have to have a license fee payment of $150. So therefore, notice how down here I've used the same analogy as I did on this picture right here. We have our original black piles of gold that gave me all of my original stuff. But I'm just looking at the new Marine Corps pile of gold. And I'm saying, what is the new price I'm going to get from the Marine Corps minus what is the new variable cost I'm going to get from the Marine Corps? So that's the contribution margin when I sell to the Marine Corps. And what is the volume that I'm going to sell to the Marine Corps? So this is the total pile of blue Marine Corps contribution margin I'm going to put on here. And then the question is are there any new fixed costs? Did I have to add some new fixed costs to the pile? And the answer, if you look at it, you go, yes, because now you've got to purchase the equipment to make this fancy reticle. And notice, it's an extra $10,000. So I now know that I did have to add another $10,000 into the fixed cost pile. Now, if you want to say, well, it was $1 million, now it's $1,010,000, you can do that. But it is completely unnecessary and irrelevant. We only care about the incremental accounting. We don't care about what already happened. So the original $1 million, the original 3.062 million contribution margin, the original 2.062 EBIT, that's done. We're now talking about the incremental stuff. So I've got a new variable cost for a Marine Corps scope, Raider scope. What's that? 875, 925. So my new variable cost is $925 instead of $775. Okay? I don't know what price I have to charge the new Marine Corps. All right, but that's going to be the contribution margin I get from the new Marine Corps. Whatever new price I charge them minus their new variable cost, that's the volume that's the contribution margin I get to put on this pile. And I'm going to sell some volume of this. That's going to be times X star. And I have to pay $10,000, and I'm going to get some incremental gold over here, the EBIT that I'm going to get from the Marine Corps. And in this particular problem, I said, okay, imagine that we're going to sell 250 a month. Now we know this X is 250. So we've got, it's just the same old equation again now. I don't have to worry about the black. I'm just worrying about the blue when I do this, right? And I go, okay, the Marine Corps price minus the $925 that I have to pay for variable cost of each of those. I'm going to sell 250 of those things. Oh, excuse me, not equals. Minus, I have to pay an extra $10,000 in fixed cost is going to be equal to whatever the EBIT that I want to make. That's what's going to happen now. And then the specification is I said, okay, what price would you have to charge to maintain the same gross profit margin you made before? Well, we know we made 41.25% before. So what price will we have to charge the Marine Corps to maintain that 41.25%? Does it matter this? No, it doesn't. All I want, let's just do this over here. The Marine Corps cost, what am I trying to do? Or the Marine Corps cost structure. I want the gross profit margin, okay, for these Marine Corps, the 250 Marine Corps scopes. I want that gross profit margin to be the exact same 41.25% that I used to make. I also know that gross profit margin is defined as being the EBIT. I'll do these stars here, okay, so that we know it's the Marine Corps. I know that the gross profit margin of the Marine Corps is it needs to be 41.25%. And I know that gross profit margin is defined as the EBIT that I make at 250 scopes divided by the revenue I bring in at 250 scopes, and I still want this to be 0.4125. Do I know what the EBIT is? Minus F plus P minus V. So it's minus F star, the new F, plus the new price minus the new variable cost times the new volume divided by the new price times the new volume has to still be equal to the 41, is still equal to the 4125, okay? And I know all these numbers. Do I know the fixed cost? Yep, it's going to cost me an extra $10,000 a month. Do I know the price? Nope, that's what I'm looking for, the price. Do I know the variable cost? Yes, I do. It's going to be $925 now. Do I know the volume? Yes, I do. The volume is going to be 250. Divided by, do I know the volume? Yes, it's going to be 250 times the new price equals 0.4125. So that's all we're doing. We're just solving that equation incrementally. Doesn't matter what happened before, it's incrementally. And that's all I did right here. I did it incrementally. If you prefer a picture, like here, when I did this, I did a picture rather than doing the algebra. You can do this as a picture, okay? So what would a picture look like? We're going to sell 250 Marine Corps scopes. Okay? What are the pieces we have to cover in that 250? Each of those scopes has to do what? Each of those scopes has to cover the new variable cost, which is now, was it 925? Yeah. 925. Each of those scopes has to provide a little bit of money to cover the new fixed cost. So the new allocated fixed cost is that $10,000 I have to pay for the equipment spread out over the 250 scopes is, what is that, 400 bucks? Okay. And then I don't know what my per unit profit is going to be. I know that the price I'm going to charge the Marine Corps is the sum of those three. So it's going to be pi star plus 400 plus 925. And I know I want pi star divided by p star to be equal to 4125. And I can substitute in p star. So this is going to be pi star divided by, now I'm just substituting that in for p, pi star plus 400 plus 925 equals 0.4125. So whatever, you can do it either way. I don't care. It's just an incremental analysis. And when you do this, you will find out the new price that I have to charge the Marine Corps is $1,642.55. Does that bother anybody? The Marine Corps has higher variable costs because of that porous trimmer reticle. Plus I have to pay for some more fixed cost, yet I can maintain the same 41.25% margin while charging them less than I charge the civilian market. How can that possibly be? Well, that's because the original capability cost me $1 million. The incremental capability only cost me 10,000 bucks. So yeah, this happens all the time. It's absolutely true that incremental volume that you sell to somebody that makes use of existing capability can be sold to somebody else for cheaper than your original capability. Okay? Is that clear? The thing you have to remember from this is it does have one major flaw. What's the major flaw if you start, here, we'll come back over here. I've done enough of this for a minute. So what's the major flaw if you start going out, selling at the highest contribution margin until you can't find any more buyers at that price? So you go find the next highest contribution margin. You keep on finding the next. What's the flaw here? Where do you get into trouble? Who can help me with that? Really? You guys are executive MBAs at one of the elite MBA institutions in the country. You got to do better than that.
So eventually somebody's going to want you to build another plant and keep that same price.
Wouldn't you be pissed off if you were a civilian customer and you paid 2,000 bucks for a scope that was inferior to the scope the Marine Corps got for only $1,642? Wouldn't that piss you off? Now, maybe in this particular market, since there's a division, a clear distinction between the civilian market and the Marine Corps market, maybe that's not a problem. But what if we were talking about, here, I'm going to ask you guys a very controversial question. Okay? Here's a controversial question. You know, with respect to AIDS drugs, there's a big debate between AIDS activists and the pharmaceutical companies about the cost of selling AIDS drugs into sub-Saharan Africa. And the pharmaceutical companies say it cost me about, just to make my manufacturing cost for a 1 year AIDS cocktail is about $2,000. So I have to charge something more than $2,000 to cover my manufacturing cost to sell AIDS drugs into sub-Saharan Africa. And the activists will say that's not true. It only costs you $50 to make those drugs. Who's right? Who's wrong? Who's lying? Who's telling the truth? Help me out here, guys. How much does it cost a pharmaceutical company to sell 1 year of AIDS drugs cocktails into the market, into sub-Saharan Africa? What does it cost them? Is it $50 or is it $2,000? Who's lying?
Well, it's probably 50.
Adam, go ahead. Was it you that were saying something at first?
Yeah, I was gonna say if they're selling to Africa, they're probably getting tax breaks. They're probably selling it for $50. But when they're selling to the
Let's say
domestic
there's
market-
no tax breaks. Let's completely eliminate tax breaks out of this, okay? I agree there can be, but let's completely eliminate them. So no tax breaks, no tax incentives associated with this question.
Okay. This is with a very little knowledge of how they operate, but
It would be
they can't get the kind of return in Africa because they don't have insurance companies paying that full price.
Okay, so you're saying they can't support the same price. That's fine. Nana, you were going to say something?
I would say 2000. That's capitalism. Like you already have everything invested. You are making profit. Like it, I could
Well,
make.
Gold Rat would love you, dude. Okay. All right. Now here, hang on.
try.
Help me out here. Do the AIDS drugs activists have any point here? They're arguing.
They're only if they go ask for like a low-level startup pharmaceutical company.
Nope. I'm not talking
Then
about
it
any.
becomes a different price point for somebody, a big player. Yeah, I mean, that's my leverage. I have everything invested. So yes, it is less, but I must include all my effort and point up to the point. So it's
Okay, I think
2000.
you're close. Okay, somebody else help me, and I think it's close, but I want you
Well,
to be an AIDS activist right now, and I want you in this class right now to make the argument that it costs a pharmaceutical company only $50 to make and sell AIDS drugs into sub-Saharan Africa. I want somebody to take that position.
You can say
Well, if I
that
were-
you're making your profit elsewhere in wealthier economies, and anything that any additional you sell above your cost to just produce the physical serum, whatever
So Jeff
your
is
raw
correct.
materials, right, and production cost is profit for you. So why wouldn't you do it?
Y'all are all correct, but I don't know why you won't just use the damn words we're talking about in this class. Okay, so let's use the words we're talking about in this class. Here's the bottom line. The variable cost associated with making an AIDS drug cocktail is probably $50 a year. The $2,000 that we're talking about for AIDS drugs cocktail is when you take the variable cost of $50 and you allocate the fixed costs that it costs to develop the drugs across the volumes that you're selling. So the simple fact of the matter is neither side is right, neither side is wrong, neither side is lying. It is a question of what are you going to do about the allocated fixed costs? Now I want to come back to this picture. Okay, here. If I'm only selling one product into one market at one price, we don't run into this trouble because I simply allocate the fixed cost I have across the entire volume of whatever that sales are, and now I know what it cost me. It cost me $775 plus $400 of allocated fixed cost. It cost me $1,175 to produce a scope that I then sell for $2,000, making $825. That is true as long as there is one product, one market, one price. What's happening with the Marine Corps scope? It's literally the AIDS drug question here, okay? Because remember I said we're ignoring all the black. We're only paying attention to the blue, the incremental volume here. From an incremental perspective, in order to do the Marine Corps scopes, I only need $10,000 of incremental fixed cost spread out across the 250. So the allocated fixed cost incrementally for the Marine Corps scope is very small. It's $400, not, or whatever it was. It wasn't it must have been $40. So I must have done that wrong. Okay, it's $40. Here, what's 10,000 divided by 250? $40. Okay, so my incremental fixed cost is only $40 for each of those Marine Corps scopes. Plus, I have to pay that extra $150 of variable cost. So we got more variable cost, but a large reduction in allocated fixed cost, and that's why I can get by with a lower price. Now, here's the deal. Segmented marketing works. I can sell AIDS drug cocktail in Africa for $60 for a year, and I can sell AIDS drug cocktail in the OECD countries for $2,500 a year. I can do that, and I can be profitable, and it can work, provided one thing is true. There's no cannibalization. There has to be no way that demand that would have occurred in the high price market can be cannibalized by demand from the low price market. So if we have strong government regulatory environment, we don't allow drug imports, people don't do this, then there's no problem with this. We can actually make a completely comfortable profit, maintain our margins and everything else, having those two completely distinct markets for aged drugs. But once, see, that creates an arbitrage opportunity, people. Once somebody says, wow, I can go to sub-Saharan Africa and buy these drugs for $60. And these drugs have a market value of $2,500 in the OECD market. That's an arbitrage opportunity. And if there's something that doesn't prevent that, cannibalization is going to occur. Now, Nanda, I don't know. Can you tell me, where'd you do your undergraduate, Nanda?
I did it in India.
Did you do it in India? Okay. So, Nanda, how much did you pay for your textbooks in India? Like when you go back and you look at how much a textbook cost you when you were an undergraduate in India.
Oh, like $50, $40. Not
40
not
bucks, 50 bucks.
Yep.
Can you buy that same book here and it costs 300 bucks?
Yeah.
Okay. That's exactly the same thing, whether you realize it or not. Okay. So what happens? The publisher has certain overhead development fixed costs. That's paying the author, paying for all the setting up the printing presses and everything else. Those are the fixed costs. The market in India won't support a $250 textbook, but it's a very large market. The market in the US will support a $250 textbook. So therefore, as long as they can segment those markets, the exact same producer can sell the exact same book in the US for $250 and the exact same book in India for $50. Now the truth is they changed the variable cost a little bit. As you remember, you use shitty paper on the Indian books and they have a crappy cover and all the other stuff. But the bottom line is you can segment those markets as long as cannibalization doesn't occur. And so the question around cannibalization is it possible to buy a $50 book in India and use it to satisfy a $250 demand in the US? If that's true, then cannibalization can occur. And the fact of the matter is here, I'm going to pay you guys the value of this course in the rest of your MBA program. There are a bunch of smart, well set up Indian entrepreneurs who know about this exact problem. So when you have to buy your textbooks next semester for whatever classes you have to do, simply come up with a list of the textbooks, go do a search in India. They know there's an arbitrage opportunity. Buy the textbooks, and they're going to charge you a price between the $50 they have to pay in India and the $250 you have to pay here, and you'll save money because it's this exact same thing. Okay? So
Isn't this the arbitrage opportunity a lot of folks are exploiting, buying
every
stuff
time.
Alibaba and selling here at bulk? Like, that's like the business model.
But it works perfectly fine. You know how we know whether it works? Here's the question. In fact, let's go now to let's now take a look at the example that I constructed to try to illustrate this exact point. I think this is the most, like I said, I think it's one of the most important ideas that we're going to cover in class. So I want to just cover this, okay? So I constructed an example to try to, that's not it, sorry. To try to get this idea across. All right, so let's walk through this example. Okay, so that was the 2019 exam. We just went over your homework and had a great conversation, hopefully you thought. Now we're going to try a new example.
Sorry, Professor. Quick question. I was curious before we jump into this tiered pricing, if you took the same problem with the marine scopes, and let's say that the estimated volume was additional 381, so 380 would be your excess capacity. What happens if they wanted to order one over that?
So that's we're gonna we're going to explore exactly what Frank is asking right now. So Frank,
Okay.
as usual, an excellent question, just a little bit early. Okay, so hang on. All right, so here we go. I want to do an example and I want to explore this exact idea because tiered pricing, incremental costing, incremental fixed cost, it's a very powerful tool, but it's a tool you got to be very careful with because if you're not careful with it, it can burn you. And so I want to show you how to do this. Okay, and I think that's worth spending probably the next 40 minutes on. Then y'all just be on your own to read the stuff for next class, and we'll talk about it next week. Okay.
Okay.
All right, here we go. I want you to imagine a hypothetical situation. It's true, but it's a hypothetical situation. So you're walking, not all of you are from Texas, but a lot of you are from Texas. So you're walking down the grocery store aisle at H-E-B, and you go to the ketchup section, and you want to buy some ketchup. And you see on the aisle, you see the brand name, let's say Hunt's or Heinz, I don't care whatever ketchup you like. Hunt's ketchup, it's the brand name and it's sitting on the shelf. And then you see right next to that, you see the H-E-B brand of ketchup. I think H-E-B store brands are called Hill Country Fair. So you see Hill Country Fair ketchup sitting right next to Hunt's ketchup. And the H-E-B store brand ketchup is going to be cheaper, right? Does everybody agree this happens all the time? Now, the truth is that H-E-B doesn't have a ketchup factory somewhere. H-E-B is purchasing that ketchup as incremental volume from some third-party manufacturer, perhaps even Hunt's, okay? And my job now is to walk through the idea of how this works, how it's related to incremental fixed cost, how it's related to cannibalization and all of the other things. That's what I want to do. So here's the way we're going to do this. I'm going to turn it back to the doc cam. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to split this page in half. And every time I'm on this side of the page, we're looking at something from the Hunt's perspective. So we have on our Hunt's cap every time we're on that side of the page. And every time we're on this side of the page, we have on our H-E-B cap. So this is the H-E-B perspective. Okay? So we have to switch back and forth between whose hat we're wearing. So let's get some data. There is a Hunt's factory. I'm making this up, but the numbers are reasonable, and they're just to try and illustrate ideas. So there is a Hunt's factory that Hunt's has decided to invest in. They built the factory, and the factory has a capability of doing a maximum of 1.2 million bottles per month. So that's what the factory is capable of doing, 1.2 million bottles per month. And they have a brand manager working in Hunt's who owns the H-E-B relationship, okay? And here, I'll just go across the pictures here. Brooke, congratulations. Brooke is now the Hunt's brand manager for the H-E-B account. So you own the H-E-B account, Brooke, okay? All right. And Brooke has gone and talked with H-E-B and has determined that they're going to sell Hunt's ketchup at H-E-B, and we've started selling it, and we've kind of stabilized at 1 million bottles per month. So Brooke has a very good account. They're selling 1 million bottles a month of this H-E-B factory of this Hunt's factory to H-E-B. And some other pieces of information about the Hunt's factory. On a monthly basis, its fixed costs are $1 million. So this factory has to have $1 million a month just to keep its doors open. Those are all the capital costs, the labor cost, all the fixed costs, any debt service, all of the stuff that we require to keep our door open. Every time we make a bottle of ketchup, the variable costs are $1 per bottle. That means that's like, for the tomatoes and for the vinegar and for the sugar and for the bottle and for the label and all that other stuff, it's $1 per bottle variable cost. And Brooke has negotiated a price such that the per unit profit is $1 per bottle. Okay, so good job, Brooke. You've been getting good bonuses. In fact, if we want to look at it, we can draw the bar chart. That's always useful to think about. Okay, so here's the bar chart. We're selling Hunt's brand ketchup to HEB. This is from the Hunt's perspective. So we're looking at it from Brooke's perspective or Brooke's management chain perspective. And if you look at it, every time we make a bottle of Hunt's ketchup, we owe the variable cost of $1 per bottle. Now we have to recover the fixed cost, right? So we have to take a little bit of a fixed cost and allocate it for each of these. Since our fixed costs are $1 million per month, and we're selling 1 million bottles a month on average, our fixed cost that we allocate from each bottle are $1, and we're making $1 per unit profit, which means we're selling it for a price of $3. So Brooke set up a good price with HEB. They're selling it for $3. If you think about that, that means there are 1 million sales, each sale generating $1 of profit. So Brooke is responsible for revenues of $3 million and profits of $1 million. So Brooke's gross profit margin is $1 out of every $3 or 33%. And so Brooke has been running this. It's been going well. Ashley, you're Brooke's CEO. I'm just going by whose pictures are next to each other on my thing. Okay. Ashley, you're Brooke's CEO. You've been pretty happy with this. You got a 33% gross profit margin. You're making $1 million of EBIT a month. And Brooke is responsible for this relationship with HEB. Now, let's stop thinking from the Hunt's perspective for a moment. Let's go over and take a look at it from the HEB perspective now. So what does HEB think of this? Well, HEB has their own cost structure, okay? They are selling 1 million bottles a month, right? This is the sell-through. That's how come they're offering this. So their volume is 1 million bottles a month. Okay? Now, HEB would like to make profit on each of these bottles it sells. And HEB's kind of greedy on this. They want to make $1 per unit profit on this. That's a very high profit for a retail grocery store. And HEB has, quick, I get a little fly. Okay. HEB has their own fixed costs. I don't know if y'all know this. Early in my career, I did this a lot, right? But when a retail store like HEB has a certain amount of shelf space, what they do is they say, how much money does it cost to keep an HEB store open for a month? And they divide that across the available shelf space, and they come up with a shelf space cost. And this is what it costs to dedicate a certain amount of shelf space in HEB. And that's what they use as their fixed cost. So HEB has gone through this, and they found out that their allocated fixed cost is 50 cents a bottle. So they can do their own little drawing. Remember, we have to be sure to switch between perspectives here. That's taller. Why is this taller? HEB has to buy a bottle from Hunt's, and they had to pay $3. So HEB's variable cost is $3, right? Because that's their, HEB is paying $3 for every bottle they acquire from Hunt's. Okay, so that's HEB's variable cost. Then HEB, as noted, has an allocated fixed cost of 50 cents per bottle. And as noted, HEB itself likes to make $1 profit. And if you look at this, HEB is charging to the end customer $4.50 for that bottle of ketchup. And if you look at that, that means HEB is making $1 profit out of a $4.50 sale. So let's do that. 22.2%. All right, so right now we have a pretty happy system. Brooke is happy, Ashley is happy, Hunt's is making good money. A 33% margin is pretty damn good for almost any business. So all things are going well here. HEB's happy. So whoever is responsible for the HEB relationship is happy because they're making 22% margin, which is outstanding for a grocery chain. So everybody's happy. And then here's what happens. Turns out Lance, you're next in the picture, okay, Lance. Lance paid attention in his operations and supply chain class, okay? And he graduates with his EMBA. He doesn't want to do whatever he's doing now, okay? And he decides he wants to go be a channel brand manager for Hunt's. And he remembers Ashley. Ashley graduated a few years before him, but he remembers Ashley. He calls her up and says, hey, do you got anything for me? And Ashley says, well, you know, we're selling 1 million bottles a month, but we have a capability of 200,000 we're not selling right now. Yeah, I'll hire you in. Lance, you come in and you figure out what to do with that 200,000 of unused capacity. If you can make me a good profit, I'll give you a good bonus. Okay, now, Brooke, you're still doing a great job. No problem. Brooke is great. Everything's going well. This is just a new incremental opportunity that Ashley sees with Lance. Now, Lance paid a lot of attention in ops, okay? Sat right in front, asked lots of questions, was always awake. And he goes, you know, this sounds an awful lot like that incremental analysis that Britt was talking about. And when I'm looking for selling new bottles to HEB, I don't have to consider the existing fixed costs. Those are already a sunk cost. They don't impact my incremental analysis. So this is the picture from the Hunt's brand perspective. So here's Hunt's brand. So this is Hunt's brand manufacturing from Hunt's perspective. This is Hunt's brand sales from HEB's perspective. So I'm going to use red now. Okay. And with red, I'm going to take a look at, okay, we're going to sell HEB brand. We're going to use some of that unused capacity and we're going to sell HEB brand. So let's see what happens when we put this into the game. And Lance paid attention. He goes, I don't care about that fixed cost anymore. All I care about is I need to cover my variable cost, and we're going to put the same ingredients in, different label, different bottle, but it's about the same. So I'm still going to have about $1 of variable cost in each of these. Don't have to pay the fixed cost, okay? Don't have to pay it. And Brooke's making $1 a bottle profit. I'd like to go ahead. I don't want to make less than $1 a bottle profit because that's what Brooke's making right now. Ashley wants me to make as much money as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try and make $1 a bottle profit, and my price equals $2. So that's what Lance proposes to Ashley and to HEB. And they both sign off on it. So the Hunt's factory starts making those incremental volume for for HEB brand ketchup. And now if you come over here and look at HEB, what does HEB look like when it's selling this stuff? All right, first of all, you have to understand the old variable cost for a Hunt's brand was $3, but their variable cost now is only $2, right? Their allocated fixed cost, well, they still have the same shelf space. So HEB has the same shelf space, so they still have allocated fixed cost of 50 cents. And HEB would still like to make $1 profit on this as well. So here's HEB's dollar profit. And if you look at this, the price of this one is $3.50. And HEB says, you know what? I think there's a market for my ketchup at $3.50 a bottle. Yes, the original branded market and people who want to buy Hunt's brand will pay the $4.50, but I bet you there's some people who will spend $300. Okay, stop. Sorry, my wife is yelling at our dog. Okay, so all right. So HEB is happy because now they have tiered pricing. When their customer walks through the store, they can pay $4.50 for the branded Hunt's ketchup, or they can pay $3.50 for the for the cheaper HEV brand. Notice the decrease in price did not arise because of some magical increased efficiency or whatever. That's not what happened here. It's the exact same factory making the exact same ketchup under the exact same circumstance. People often think that cheaper prices only arise because of magical efficiencies or cheaper variables. No, everything's the same here. Okay, I want you to understand that everything's the same. Now, I want to tell a story about Lance and Brooke and Ashley. Okay, because Lance sets this up. Things are going pretty well for a couple of months, and Lance asks for a meeting with Ashley and Brooke. And Ashley and Brooke, everybody's happy, so they agree to the meeting. Lance goes in the meeting, and then Lance kind of throws a wrench into this. He goes, Ashley, you hired me to come in and create a new business. I created a new business. We're selling unused capacity to HED. Now you give Brooke a really big bonus because she makes that $1 million a month and everything's happy. But I want to show you something, Ashley. Look at my incremental sales. I'm making $1 profit on a $2 sale, which means my gross profit margin is 50%. Brooke is only making 33%. I actually think Brooke sucks. I don't know why Lance said that. You really shouldn't have said that, okay? But Lance decides that Brooke sucks, and basically whatever bonus you were giving to Brooke, you ought to cancel her bonus and give it to Lance instead because he's generating a higher margin than Brooke was when she was doing her stuff. And Ashley, you go, well, damn, you're right. That is an incremental gross profit margin of 50%. And you go, Brooke, I'm sorry, but I am. I'm going to take your bonus this month and next month, and until you can figure out this problem, I'm going to take your bonus and I'm going to give it to Lance instead because he's generating a 50% gross profit margin, and you're only generating a 33% gross profit margin. Okay, everybody understand the story? Brooke is pissed. Okay. It turns out that Brooke is good friends with Jeff. And Jeff is the accounting manager at Hunt's. And Brooke goes and talks to Jeff and says, Jeff, this is bullshit. The only reason this is happening is because Lance isn't paying any fixed cost. I'm paying all the fixed cost. This isn't fair. What I think we should do is Lance's new business. So Lance should have to absorb all the fixed cost, and let's recalculate this. Jeff and Brooke have been friends forever. They remember back to their MBA days and everything. They've been friends. And so Jeff says, yeah, let's do that. So Jeff changes the accounting rules and instead charges $1 for every bottle, just like they used to charge over here, $1 for every bottle for allocated fixed cost, $1 for every bottle of Lance's sales. And now there's a new meeting with Ashley. And basically Brooke says, look, guys, Lance is not only not making a 50% gross profit margin, we've simply charged him the same $1 per bottle that we used to charge me for allocated fixed cost. He's making 0% gross profit margin. And if you look at it, I'm actually doing better than 33% because, part of my fixed cost had been shifted and they're off on Lance. So she proposes to Ashley to just fire Lance, okay? Because obviously he didn't worth the shit, and he's come in and he's sold this new stuff and he's making a 0% gross profit margin, okay? Now here's the question I have for you after that long drawn out story. What do you think about what I just said? Somebody dissect it and tell me where it's right, where it's wrong, what the point is, what we have to do. Help me out here. Who's right?
I can jump
Is
in.
Lance making a good deal? Is Brooke making a good deal? Should Ashley fire Lance? Should Ashley fire Brooke? What should happen here?
I'll jump in if you can hear me.
Give it a shot.
All right, so a few things going on. So the original setup with using the incremental capacity to create the HEB brand seems consistent. Got the
I
extra
was right.
space.
This black picture is correct. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and the idea to use the extra 200,000 bottle capacity to create this HEB brand also makes sense. So
Okay.
the original setup makes a lot of sense. Where I think it starts to break down is there are a few places. So when looking at the gross profit margin, this is a common failure for engineers. They look at the percent and forget about the absolute. So Brooke's going to be bringing in $1 times a million bottles, so $1 million a month in profit. Lance will be bringing in $1 times 200,000 bottles, so he's bringing in 200,000. So while correct, he is theoretically bringing in a 50% gross profit margin. He's actually bringing in fewer dollars. You also made a comment about allocating the fixed cost to the HEB brand versus the Hunt brand. So I guess if you were to do that, you would have to, it wouldn't be a full dollar onto the HEB brand. You'd have to allocate the $1 million over 1.2 million bottles.
Okay.
So coming back to who should be fired, I don't think anyone should be fired. Everyone did their job well.
No, Ashley should be fired because she should know all this stuff and she should
Correct.
not be making these dumb management decisions. Okay. Will you agree with that, Mykola?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Mykola is mostly correct, but I'm going to take it a level deeper, okay? Because I want you to really understand this point right here. I'm gonna see if I can create this point by asking. I'm going to ask Ashley a question now. Okay, Ashley, you're the CEO. It's at near the end of the month, Ashley, and Brooke has gone and she's made lots of sales, and she's sold 1,050,000 bottles of Hunt's brand. And Lance has gone and he sold 165,000 of the HEB brand. Okay, that's what's happened up till now. We're about to close out the month. And just before we close out the month, the phone rings and HEB is going to order one more bottle of ketchup. Do you want that one more bottle of ketchup that they're ordering to be a Hunt's brand, or do you want that one more bottle of ketchup that they're ordering to be an HEB brand? Why or why not? That's the question, Ashley.
I think I want it to be the HEB brand because the fixed cost. I may change my answer.
Ah, good. I'm glad you're changing your answer. Say it again now, okay?
Okay, I think I want it to be because the maximum capacity on the Hunts was all the way to the 1.2 million.
Yep. I mean, we could. Yep.
I think that's what I'm thinking. So I think I want it to be the Hunts brand.
I'm going to tell you, here's the point, and it took all of this conversation to get here, okay? So I'm going to say, just bear with me. I don't give a shit about allocated fixed costs. Allocated fixed costs are an accounting argument. I don't care what the fixed costs are. I don't care how you allocate them. I don't care what Jeff says. And when he's trying to sit up and decide who gets to allocate it. You know the only thing that matters? I'm going to show you this picture. And I don't know any way to get this across better than to go through this long story to try to show this idea. So let's go back to this picture. I'm going to come back to what I just showed you, but hang loose. Remember my original picture was you have the sum of all the PI minus the VI minus the fixed cost equals the EBIT. Okay? And each PI minus VI you get to throw onto the pile, and you created this pile of money, which is the sum of all the contribution margins. Does everybody agree? Okay. From which We have to pay whatever our fixed costs are, which then tells us what our EBIT is. Does everybody agree, at least in principle, with that picture? Do you know what arguing over allocated fixed cost is? Do you know what it is? When Jeff's sitting here and he's doing his accounting and he's going through and figuring out who pays what. We just put a coin on this pile. Do you know what accounting is doing? Accounting is making the argument, should that coin on that pile be considered in this pile, or should that coin on that pile be considered in this pile? But it literally makes no difference between the size of the piles. It literally makes no difference. Whether you decide, okay, Jeff has changed the rules because he likes Brooke, and what used to go into fixed cost for Brooke now goes into Brooke's EBIT, or Jeff hates, whoever hates whoever's doing it and decides to call it fixed cost instead of EBIT. None of it changed the size of the pile. So let's go back to this question. It's at the end of the month and a call is coming in and we're about to get a new order from HEB. If they order a Hunts brand, what do we get to throw on the pile? Well, we get a $3 a price. I do not care about what you call profit versus allocated fixed cost. I do not care. I only care about the variable cost. Do you agree if we get a Hunts brand order, we're about to throw $2 on the pile for that order? Do you agree if we get an HEB brand, we're about to throw $1 on that pile? Do I care what your accounting says? Absolutely not. In this picture, would you rather throw $2 on that pile or would you rather throw $1 on that pile? See, that's the problem with allocated fixed cost. Everybody's always worried about how to allocate it. Everybody's worried about what's fair or not fair. It doesn't matter. We're right back to the same sunk cost problem. It doesn't matter. You know the only thing that fixed cost buys you? You know what this does? The only thing it does is it says, you now have the capability over this next period of time to do up to this volume of stuff. That's what it buys you. Nothing more. I don't care how you account for it after that. It bought you the capability. Now, what's your job? Your job is to go out and sell the crap out of that capability and sell it for the highest contribution margin you can until you can't sell any more of that or you run out of capability. And then sell it at the next highest contribution margin until you run out of that capability. And keep on doing that, because if you make this pile as big as you possibly can for the capability that you purchased, minus this pile, you will have made this pile as big as you can. And if you go, but that's only true if you're past the break even, it's still true. If you make this pile as big as you possibly can, even if it isn't past the break even, you've lost the least amount of money that you could. So all fixed cost does, and it's the hardest thing to get across to people, but it's the most important thing I can do. All fixed cost does is buy you the capability to do something. That's all it does. And then your job is to make the contribution margin pile as big as possible. This is the heart of what Goldrat's arguing in his book. We're not going to get to it today. We'll have to do it next time, okay? But the heart of what Goldrat was arguing in his book around his throughput accounting, it's this mistake, okay? So, Ashley, when you're running your business, you want to sell as many of these as you can. None of this shit matters. The only thing that matters is P minus V. P minus V becomes your contribution margin. That's what you get to put on this pile. And your job is to make this pile as big as you possibly can. So it kind of begs the question, and we'll do this, and then I want to show you the last thing, and then we'll close out for today. It begs the question, why do we have accounting departments? Why do we do managerial accounting? Why do we allocate fixed costs? It's because it enforces behavior. Okay, so the problem we have is in class, this concept works perfectly fine. In class, when we're talking about this, we can say, conceptually, what Ashley should do as the CEO of this company is figure out how much capability she wants to pay for, then sell the shit out of that capability to make this pile as big as possible so that this EBIT pile is big as possible. In principle, that is exactly correct. In practice, it's very hard to say to a large company, go forth and make the EBIT pile as big as possible. What we end up having to do is we have to manage different departments. So we have brand manager 1 and brand manager 2 and product 1 and product 2. And now we have the problem that we have a certain capability of the fixed costs, but we have to measure people who only use pieces of the fixed cost. So we spend a lot of time figuring out how to spread out the fixed cost. I understand that from an organizational perspective. I understand that dilemma. But I want you to understand, if those of you remember calculus, this is a sub-optimization problem. It's forgetting that the big picture, the big thing that you have to do is this picture. And it's focusing instead on who gets to say they got a 50% margin, who gets to say they got a 33% margin. And you're going to have to figure out how to manage that, guys. I don't know how to manage that. That's why I'm a professor, right? Those who can do, those who can't do, teach. But anyway, so you're going to have to figure out how to manage the barrier or the boundary between this is the way that people get motivated by their individual rewards and punishments, but this is the way the company wins or loses. You're going to have to figure out how to manage that, and it's a hard one. Now let's do one last thing. If you guys follow this, everything I said, this last slide will be easy. Okay, so here's what I want you to understand. Suppose that Ashley, when this all got proposed in the first place, and Ashley was deciding whether to do it or not, Ashley decided to go hire some market research firms because she was trying to figure out whether or not that her factory should start making any of these HEB brand stuff. And she was worried, you know, she knew about cannibalization. She knew that there was the problem that if HEB carried not only Hunt's, but also carried Hill Country Fare, and it was a cheaper price, people who would have bought Hunt's might buy the HEB brand and they'll lose some sales. So she was worried about this, right? Because she paid attention in class. So she hired 2 market research firms, market research firm A and market research firm B, and asked those 2 market research firms, what do you think will happen to our sales if HEB starts offering Hill Country Fare in addition to the branded products? And let me tell you about market research firm A versus market research firm B. Market research firm A, from their research, determined that Hunt's brand was fairly well branded, that people who went to the store to buy ketchup had a very strong preference for Hunt's brand, and a cheaper store brand would be unlikely to change their decision. If you will, most of you guys have decided whether you're Coke or Pepsi people. And when you go and you can find Coke or Pepsi, whichever it is that you don't normally buy, on sale, that often doesn't affect your purchasing decisions because you're strongly branded to one or the other, right? That's what strong branding does. That's what it needs. So market research firm A felt that Hunt's brand was fairly strongly branded. And so they said, yeah, we used to sell on average 1 million Hunt's ketchup, and we didn't have this one, so we didn't sell any of these. And we think if you start offering that, there's going to be a little bit of cannibalization. So instead of 1 million, we're only going to sell 950,000, but we're going to sell 200,000 of those new brand, you know, the HEB brand. That was scenario A. That's what market research firm A thought. Market research firm B, however, felt that Hunt's brand wasn't nearly as strongly branded as they thought. And if there were a cheaper alternative, a lot higher percentage of cannibalization would occur. So the 1 million would go down to 800,000, but there'd be a lot of sales of this, 300,000. So here's the question I have for you to wrap up today. I want you to look at, first of all, scenario A. If market research firm A is correct, and scenario A is what's likely to happen, should Hunt's engage in this relationship with HEB or not? Yes or no? Sell the ketchup or not? Somebody tell me this. And if you followed this argument, this is a 5-second question. Who wants to take this on? I'm giving you a big hint. This argument.
They should.
Okay, who said they should and why?
Nanda.
Okay, Nanda, why?
Yeah. They should do it, but they should have some operating agreements.
No, don't give me any of the MBA shit around the. I want to know from the math we've done, what's the answer, Nanda? Can anybody help Nanda? From the math we've done, with a 5-second calculation, how do we know whether we should do it or not?
3.1 million contribution margin.
You don't even have to do that. You're right, but you don't even have to do that. It's an incremental analysis. Who said 3.1 million?
That was me, James.
Okay, James. How about this? We're just looking at the changes in the contribution margin pile, right? Did the fixed cost pile change? Nope. So whatever changes there are in the contribution margin pile will show up directly in the EBIT pile. Is that correct? What happened to the contribution margin pile? We used to have 1 million. Now we only have 950,000. Doesn't that mean $50,000, $2 we didn't get to put on the pile? Everybody agree? That's $50,000, $2 contribution margins we didn't get to put on the pile. That's $100,000 we didn't get to put on the pile. But what did we get to put on the pile? $200,000, $1 contribution margins. So if you lost $100,000 on the contribution margin pile, but you added $200,000, don't you agree that's a net $100,000 on this contribution margin pile? Don't you agree that means your EBIT just went up by $100,000? Does it matter how you account for all this shit in the accounting department? Does it matter what was allocated fixed cost or blah, blah, blah? Does any of that shit matter? Not even at all. Now, how about in the second case? We're about to wrap up. Scenario B, what now?
That's a loss.
So I have a question. Where did you get the 50 cents you're talking about? Is it because we're looking at?
I didn't say 50 cents ever. So I said here, go back here. Do you agree that when I sell a Hunt's brand, I don't care about pi and FA, that's all bullshit accounting. I care about 3 minus 1 is 2, right? So do you agree that for every Hunt's brand ketchup, I get to throw $2 on the contribution margin pile? Do you agree with that?
Yes, correct. Yep.
Likewise, do you agree for the HEB brand, I get to put $1 on the contribution margin pile? Do you agree?
Yes.
Okay, so now, we had our original contribution margin pile, the black pile here. Everybody agree? We had the black pile. That black pile was the pile that was created when we sold our base case of 1 million. But now we're in a new case. It's 950,000 of the Hunts and 200,000 of the HEB. What did that do to this pile? This pile used to be the million of the branded. This pile is now going to be 950,000 of the branded and 200,000 of the unbranded. 950 is less than 1 million. That's 50,000 of the branded that we didn't get to put on this pile. Each was worth $2. 50,000 times $2 is $100,000. So we just put $100,000 less contribution margin on this pile from Brooks' side of the ledger. That's the HEB sales, right? But we got to put 200,000 of the $1 contribution margin on, I forgot who it was. Jack, was it Jack? Who is the other person? Lance, Brooke, who is your colleague?
Lance.
Yeah, it was Lance.
Or Jeff. Are you talking about my competitor?
No, it was Lance. So basically, Brooke, you just got a new job for LinkedIn. You just got to put $100,000 less on this, Brooke. But Lance got to put $200,000 more on it. You look worse, Lance looks better. But from the corporate perspective just made $100,000 more. That's what I'm saying, right? So you have to see that. So take a look and make sure you understand that. In scenario B, I need to let y'all go. So in scenario B, just to figure this out, if we went from 1 million down to 800,000, that's a bummer. Because now Brooke got to put 200,000 less $2 contribution margins. That's $400,000. So Brooke just got to put $400,000 less on this pile. Lance got to put $300,000 more on this pile. Unfortunately, that's still a net decrease in this pile of 100,000, which means there was a net decrease in our EBIT of 100,000. So scenario A looks good. The company wins, even though Brooke loses and Lance wins. Scenario B is bad. The company loses, even though Lance looks like a hero. That's the thing you have to understand from this. You've got to think about the overall size of the pie. Last thing to close out. The real problem with scenario B is not only that we make less money, it's that we really don't have any choice here. Because if scenario B is correct and we're poorly branded, and if HEB offers a cheaper brand, people are going to switch from our brand to the cheaper brand. If we say no, we may think we're going back to the base case where we just keep selling 1 million of our own because we refuse to make the HEB brand. But what's HEB going to do then? They're going to go to Heinz. They're going to go to somewhere else. And they're still going to sell their cheaper ketchup, right? And really, if we say no, we don't get to go back to the 1 million and 0 case. We end up facing the 800,000 and 0 case. And now we've lost even more money. So this is a difficult thing. I want y'all to think about this. But I think there are a few things that I will talk about, or that most courses will talk about, that's more relevant than this question of fixed costs or sunk costs. After you've made the investment, all they do is buy you an opportunity. You can do two things with that opportunity. You can try to sell that opportunity to a third party who's willing to take it off your hands. That was the Gulf Coast fishermen's willing to buy the platform. Or you can use that capability to try to create contribution margin. And if you make the decisions to make your contribution margin as high as you possibly can, you will have made your profit as high as you can, or at least your losses as low as you can. And I don't know anything more important than that idea with respect to just running a basic business. And the other thing is, please don't forget, and then let's close out. Please don't forget who pays what allocated fixed cost and what the gross profit margins are and whose pie is whatever it is and whose FA is whatever it is. It doesn't matter in the big picture, because in the big picture, we're just arguing that pile of gold I just put on the contribution margin. Are we going to count it against the fixed cost pile, or are we going to count it in the EBIT pile? It's an accounting question. It's not a real numbers question. Okay? All right, so hopefully you got that. If you understand, if you can do, just to go back to our homework, if you can do the basic cost structure, the basic pricing, the basic contribution, and incremental pricing like we just did, you're in great shape. This last one, if you think about it now, this is just this problem we were just doing. Because I said, suppose you sell 125 of these scopes per month. How many of those can be cannibalized from your previous demand? Well, now we're just playing the game. I sell 125. Of that 125, some of them will be Marine Corps scopes, and they will get to throw the Marine Corps contribution margin on the pile. Some of those will be my original scopes, and they will get to put my original contribution margin on the pile. How do I calculate the ratio to figure out when my pile stayed the same? That's all this calculation is right here. Okay? All right. Have fun. You don't owe me anything for next time other than please do watch those videos. And then I guess we're going to have to try and cram some things together, and I'll come up with a new schedule because we're a little bit behind right now. Okay? All right. Take care, guys. Thank you for joining, and I will post the video as soon as it comes through.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks.